Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to another MassMEDIC webinar featuring our partners at Sunrise Labs. Today, we have a great program called Moving from the Lab to the Market, 5 Key Factors to Help Bridge the Gap. Our expert speaker today is Lauren Baker. She's the Senior Clinical and Regulatory Advisor at Sunrise Labs. Before I'm going to hand over the virtual baton to Lauren, I want to just give you a couple technical tips here to have a nice seamless experience. So Lauren's going to be moving through her presentation today. I'll be hovering in the back, making sure that any questions that get put into the Q&A or the chat tab get queued up for her, and we'll address those at the end of her prepared remarks. I'm excited to welcome everybody back. Sunrise Labs has been with us for many years, but we've been doing these great webinars all throughout 2021. You can find those webinars on demand on our Vimeo channel, and I'll make sure that we could put that in the chat. I would recommend that you check them all out. Sunrise Labs is a great member of MassMEDIC, and we're proud to be partnering with them on these series. This, I believe, is the 3rd and 4 webinars we've done over the course of the year, and hopefully we'll continue to do many more because they just do such fantastic work. So again, if you have questions, go ahead and throw them in the chat function here, or go ahead and put them in the Q&A section. We will and are recording these, so you'll be able to access these after. We'll make sure that all attendees and registrants receive a copy of both the video and the slides. Lauren, I'm going to hand over to you to drive the presentation, but I'm going to hide out off video, but I'll be here to help out.
Okay, thanks, Brian, and thanks for everyone joining over the ether. Just wanted to spend a little time this afternoon talking about how, at a pretty high level, what I've observed as some key factors that drive success when taking a concept from the lab to successful market entree. And just to kind of walk you through my background and how why you should even think that I have relevance here. I just start by telling you I have a background. I started as an engineer, so I have a good concept on what engineers do in the world. I did have an extensive career in clinical research at UMass Medical Center after getting my PhD in engineering. And I also went to Boston Scientific, where I picked up a little regulatory along the way. Spent a good amount of time at Boston Scientific, and then started my own business, Boston Biomedical Associates, which allowed me to learn a little bit about entrepreneurial efforts and what it takes to be successful in the entrepreneurial region. I work as a consultant at this stage, but I hope I can bring to the table some of the things that I learned along the way, both in the technical engineering, clinical and regulatory, and just how to take a business from concept to inception. I just list here, or I show you something that was put out by CV Insights a little while ago, where they looked at the medical device market map. And medical devices has certainly broadened in its breadth and scope. And it's, as I say, it's more than just a widget now, and it's continuing to evolve and rapidly changes. You can see things that we started off with originally, which was like, basic coronary stents and laparoscopic tools, has now ventured into things like diagnostics. And you see even the world of oncology, which it traditionally had been really reserved for non-medical device products. So because it has such a breadth and scope, and I didn't even put in here software and AI, which is a world of its own, I think it's important to understand how to take at least some considerations that I can share with you based on my past experiences of what are the important pieces to kind of close the gap from what we see on the lab bench or in your on your on your computer as a piece of software, all the way into a market entree. And I think that some key factors come around to, okay, make sure it is the right big idea. There's a lot of big ideas out there, but you really want to, hone in on something that's really relevant. And that ties into, if it's relevant, it needs to get funding, and just a great idea may not have the right applicability and the sweet spot to attract funders. And funders always look at the right team, and your team includes partners like investors, and FDA needs to be considered a partner in this picture, as well as the third-party payers. My career evolved over the past 20 plus years, and I've seen that the whole factor of payment has become part and parcel to what I put together as strategic plans for companies. Whereas 20 years ago, everything was paid for and you just had to have a really cool, big idea. So developing the playbook is critical to making sure that all of these factors get addressed, and those make for an execution of a plan much more efficient. And then, as I say, makes the big idea a reality. So I want to just spend a minute here on the big idea. And I talk to a lot of guys, gals, 3 people in a garage that have something that's very, very cool. And I think that it's really relevant to just make sure that that cool thing has a very tangible tie into a real need. And so you can select your clinical area of medicine to identify a need and really just pay attention, observe what's going on and what is the underlying problem, talk to physicians and develop that need statement. And then you can tie in that need statement to what the business realities are, brainstorm your solutions, talk to stakeholders. It's really the key feature is to really partner with the stakeholders, whether they're physicians or buying groups or hospital administrators, because you've got different kinds of solutions that address different kinds of needs. That helps you build the right business analysis and establish that true big idea. And here's an example I put forth. There's a need to reduce catheter-related bloodstream infections. That's a need, not I have a new catheter coating that's reducing infection. The need is the addressable market. And then the need is to reduce the incidence of diabetic ketoacidosis, not I have a continuous glucose monitoring catheter. So it's just a way to position it. It means a lot to how you present it to the stakeholders and most importantly, the funding resources. And everything, this graph has been adapted from a friend of mine who talked about risk and versus reward, and reward being sort of valuation for your company or your concept. And don't underestimate the need, the risk versus reward here. You could have I show the new paradigm type product here. It's very high risk. It's also very high reward. And just be realistic about, you could do some very innovative new concepts that really are low risk. They're not going to be the highest reward, but they could be pretty darn prolific, and don't underestimate them. Not everything is high reward, and understanding this paradigm of where you fit into the value proposition versus the risk of entree into the market, I think also is critical. I show here the funding maze. This has gotten complex and ever changing, I would say. The funding maze is all about you finding the right investor. You start with seed or angel, friends and family. That gets you some footing to potentially do prototyping. You could go all the way to venture and strategic partners at that level, but it's generally thought of as start off small, get your footing, understand where you're going, get some prototyping, then get a little bit more money. Strategic partners and venture capital are working very hand in hand. I see them supporting R&D efforts quite a bit together collaboratively. And I think that I would encourage anyone that's going out to do fundraising to find the right partner. This is a long-term relationship, and it's not always a marriage made in heaven. So make sure that you're aligned with the funder for the right development stage. And at some point you may want to go to the next level, which is an IPO, but that's generally a bit further down the road. I just want to spend 1 second on the team. I think that, you look at your business analysis side, which I have on the left, and then who the partners are, who the team is that you need to work with. On the financing side, obviously you need to have a team that is strong on the investment portfolio. Cost of goods, you have to work with your development partners to refine that. Pricing is going to be tied to payers. So you need to understand what your cost of goods and how that aligns with what your selling price is going to be. And that's going to tie in with either established pricing models already in existence based on CMS already having looked at similar products. Competitive dynamics, you better know who your competitors are before you have your big, great idea and before you put your playbook together. And that takes some market research, and that understanding the market and understanding who the competitors are becomes a critical component. We're going to spend a little time on regulatory strategy in the next coming slides, and that ties to understanding FDA, the review cycle, it ties to market research in a way, because we look at the competitors when we develop regulatory strategies. It's a piece of the whole playbook. And the exit strategy, a lot of people I work with in companies or folks with new ideas, they walk up and they say, okay, here's my little widget. I want to just, get a 510K, and then I just want to sell it. Or I just want to do 2 prototypes and then I want to sell it. That's a great concept. I think that when you put the whole package together, it becomes a component that I would say to stay in touch with the right potential exit partners, stay in touch with bankers if you're ever venturing into the IPO space, and stay in touch with the strategics or whoever is a likely candidate. And that's how I think the analysis ties to who you put on your team. So the balance here is to come up with that targeted marketing plan, which ties to a strong regulatory plan, get the financial support that's necessary, and then that would result in the successful and timely product introduction. It's an evolution. It needs to be tied with some knowledge and a good solid plan that you start with and you adapt as you go along. I can tell you I've worked with hundreds and hundreds of products, and there has never been a product where the day that the product got conceived, it was the same product that came out in the end. I've had one product that I've worked with a client that is potentially, remain the same, but there's always something that changes. So now we'll talk about the plan and the playbook that goes along with a good solid reg plan. Ties to the market approval regulations and understanding your region. Anyone that's in med device today understands today that the EU MDR is upon us and has made Europe shift from being what was the easy entree market to now the second in position past the United States. Many of my clients are going to the US first and using the data from the US to support an EU MDR package. You know, that'll settle out. I'm sure the MDR will get to some level of acceptability, but right now it's a very, very challenging proposition. So understanding that ahead of time is how now you're going to develop a plan that keeps that into consideration. And timing to the market launch is tied to understanding the necessary data package for each one of the regions. And once you have a plan for market launch, it's imperative that you understand the vigilance requirements that are mandated for your product, because it ties to the infrastructure that you're going to need to build and consider, which ties to how you're going to put your playbook together. And that also the vigilance requirements and just standard reporting requirements. Every country has a different little nuance to that. So we're going to go over the pre-market regulatory plan, which I put into 4 steps. The first one is to determine your product categorization. And as simple as that may seem, there are products that definitely are a bit in question of whether they're device or drug or a combination. Second is based on the product characterization and your complexity of your product, you can determine what the kind of submission is that you need to develop to support entree into the US. And then what's the appropriate strategy? Do you need a pre-submission, pre-meeting with regulators for the drugs and biologics? Pre-submissions are what we generally reserve for devices. And then I think a very critical component now is the reimbursement structure. We generally didn't do that in the past, and it's become part and parcel of how we think about regulatory strategies. So step 1, product category, device, drug, biologic, or combination. So first thing you need to think about is primary mode of action. Is your primary mode of action mechanical or chemical in nature? Are you manipulating something, or are you causing a chemical reaction? And then what are the claims that you have associated with that primary mode of action? So we'll talk about some examples here. The drug-coated stent is classic combo, ancillary product that started this whole concept of, wow, is it a drug? Is it a device? Is it a combination? And it is primary mode of action is mechanical. The very first mode of action for a coronary stent or any kind of peripheral vascular stent is to open up a lesion, and the drug is, as I say, icing on the cake, literally. It is to deliver some pharmacologic agent which would enhance the opening of that lesion. That's purely a mechanical. It will shift gears from cardiovascular over to orthopedics. Bone morphogenic protein, very interesting concept because BMPs look and feel like a drug, but the primary mode of action is mechanical. It's been the jurisdiction by FDA has been that this is primary mode of action mechanical and that it's a device, interestingly enough, even though some people would still call it a drug. And the SoloStar pen, which is an injectable, primary mode of action is medicinal. And the pen itself is considered much like a syringe. It is just a vehicle for administering. So it sort of gives you a sense of where things land and how to think about it. Based on so if we then land that this is a device, we then need to understand how is it regulated? Is it a pre-market approval application or PMA, or is it a 510K? And this is where some of the sausage making comes in. And, you review the FDA guidance documents that might exist. There happens to be, a plethora of guidance documents. I do commend Chef Shuren. Over the past 5 to 10 years, I've seen a massive influx of guidance documents that have come to fruition, which are pretty helpful, but know that they are guidance. They're not true regulation, and there's interpretation to some guidance documents. So keep that in mind as you build the plan. It is a piece of the component. The FDA database is the holy grail for building a regulatory strategy, because it allows us to interrogate similar products and build a set of rationales on what would make the most sense. So I use the pro codes and the regulations all the time. I must be in FDA's database, several times a week. And you look, when you find something that's similar, you look at the summary of safety and effectiveness for the devices, as well as the 510K summaries, and that provides some level of context of how to think about a new product. This just shows you an example of the 510K database. There's a little spot here for the pro code. There is, you put if you know what would be a relevant 510K number, you can put it in. Otherwise, you can put in the name of the company or the device. If you've done your market research, that's how you feed into this. Here we're doing I'm showing an example of an established orthopedic device, and this is an interbody system. It's a cage, as we call it. So I can click on that, and this would show you what you would see for this product. Here it's an orthopedic. You can see the pro code is MAX, the regulation number is listed, and the very important thing is the summary. So that summary is pretty insightful, these pro code. Here is the regulation. It tells you it's a class 2 device. I pull up 888.3080, which is interbody fusion device, and it tells you the classification for each type. So here's on the PMA side. The website looks pretty consistent. It's the same, pro codes are there, the little same applicant trade name. They have a little bit of a look and feel, but you still have the same look. I pull up something, a drug-coated stent here, and I will be able to see this kind of a framework. It shows you the pro code, the PMA number, and it can extract from that the summary of safety and effectiveness by clicking on the original PMA. And I will be able to see an SSED, as it's termed, which would show us a lot of detailed information about the data that was used to support this kind of filing. And what we do from that is we extract, okay, on a 510K side, I see a summary. On the PMA side, I see an SSED, and it gives both clinical and non-clinical testing that was used to support the actual filing. So that will give us I've reviewed the FDA guidance. I can review the SSED. I can review if it's a 510K, I review the summary. And through that, I can build a preclinical testing strategy. I can also build a clinical trial strategy that's consistent. Now, if I'm working on something that's just 3 degrees of freedom away from this, I still want to be able to look at this because that's how FDA is going to build their level of expectations. So let's talk a little bit about the discussions and when they're helpful. And, I encourage probably 95% of clients that I work with that have a new technology that's pretty innovative. 100% of those innovative ones, I'm going to encourage a interaction, a pre-IDE or pre-510K interaction with FDA. If it's a pretty consistent product and it's a 510K, it's less important. But the kinds of things that drive FDA discussion, are we doing the right animal model? How many animal models or how many animals would we need for supporting a clinical trial? That's a question that impacts costs and time frame. And I think that when you're working on an innovative device, that's a squarely solid question to engage with FDA on. I seriously will tell you it's important to get in front of them before you spend the money on the animal study to support a clinical trial. If it's just, you can, I call them play around animals and product development, refinement, that's fine. It gives FDA a little bit of comfort that you're not just making up a device. But when it's time to engage with FDA in an IDE construct, which is for the clinical trial, I would get in front of them to make sure that you are doing the right kinds of work. Clinical trial designs are the other aspect that I feel are critical to bring forth with FDA. There are lots of different new kinds of adaptive trial designs. And if there's Bayesian adaptive design, there's promising zone adaptive designs, there's standard interim reviews. And then there's also the question of whether you're using a clinical trial that is a randomized controlled trial or something more provocative or more, more challenging, I would say, by FDA, which is using an objective performance criteria. Those questions are the ones that go forth and get interacted with on a pre-IDE construct. And then if you're going to challenge the regulatory pathway, meaning, whether you want to be aggressive on, you think this is a 510K versus a PMA, that needs a preemptive discussion with FDA. So these are certainly preclinical work that's affecting time or money are the reasons to go talk to FDA. Clinical trial design is a reason to go talk to FDA. Regulatory pathway is a reason to engage with FDA. What's not a reason to engage with FDA is to check a box and say, I talked to FDA. That's less satisfying for FDA, and it's a lot of time and effort for you to engage with FDA. Make sure that it's worth your while. And how to do it, if you've never talked to FDA before and you don't have any idea where this product lands or who you should talk to, it's not generally a great idea to just send a pre-submission to Mr. and Mrs. FDA, Washington, D.C. It's a really good idea to identify which division something will go in and contact that division. That division, project manager is how they're termed on the BLA side, and a reviewer or a head of the division at that group. Cardiovascular has several different subcategories. You would contact the head of that subcategory. And then you put the formal submission together. A pre-submission includes a product description, potential indication, test plan, protocol summary, a little wet your whistle kind of, teaser for FDA to know that it's not just back of the, matchbook cover idea, or, that you came up with at a bar on a Friday night, that it's really something that's a product that has some substance. And then you can put forth some questions to FDA and engage with them. Usually takes, by the time, so you prepare your submission, FDA has an allowance of 75 days to get back to you. Some of the groups at FDA are a lot more expeditious than others. Some will get back to you within 45 days. Others take, the full 75. I recommend that the formal pre-submission requests include a request for an actual face-to-face meeting, or in this case, it's a Zoom meeting. And that lets you engage with FDA. It's a long ride for a lot of products, and I recommend the pre-IDE construct as a way for you to start your journey with your partner at FDA, because if you consider them partners and allies, it's a lot smoother ride. And let me just say that there's nothing more complicated than the reimbursement structure in the United States right now. It is an ever-changing labyrinth. It's tied to, if you work with reimbursement experts, they will tell you it's coding, coverage, and payment. Those are the three pillars of reimbursement, and they tie to where the product is administered. Is it in the hospital, out of the hospital? Is it home? Is it doctor's office? All of that needs to get considered up front, because it has a payment and coverage and cost standpoint. So is it administered by a physician or a nurse? Is it under an existing code? And is it novel and breakthrough? And everybody has probably heard some sort of buzz about breakthrough therapy designations, and how they're tied to new technology add-on payment, which is NTAP. And, up until probably 6 months ago, everybody and their uncle wanted an NTAP because it gave automatic coverage for us, 3 years or 4 years. That's wetted a little bit now because CMS put the brakes on that. So it will still come back, but the timing of that is unclear, as is everything in the world of reimbursement. If you don't have an existing DRG code, things are basically very challenging. It is important to partner with a very solid reimbursement consultant if you are trying to navigate this avenue. It's don't take it for granted. So and I wanted to leave some time for questions and feedback. So I wanted to just kind of summarize here. It's important to put your playbook together, and that playbook is tying your understanding of the technology with the actual clinical need, and getting some engagement with clinicians and partners in a hospital structure will help you define that. Do your homework on the approval options, understand whether you're going to be reviewed by CBER, understand if your software is really a medical device or it's a wellness product. Those factors come into play when you're putting your pitch deck together, your playbook together, and defining who's the right partner for you. Determining how your product fits into the reimbursement structure is become a critical element, and you can't move forward without it. And then all of those factors put together will help you really get a good solid team and put that playbook to work. Now you've got a plan, you've got a strategy, you put your team together, and then it makes for the execution very, very efficient. If you try and do this along the way, it's less satisfying for everyone. You'll hit bumps in the road for sure, it wouldn't be medical device if you didn't have some need to, do an audible. But that is worth it in the end, and you just adjust your playbook as opposed to, oh, I got a whole new playbook I got to put together. So to close the gap, we've talked about the need, a product that fits the need, the plan that ties that product together. And I can't underestimate documenting along the way with a good, solid team, and that should close the gap. So I'll leave it here for questions at this point.
Great. Lauren, can you bump back to that last slide real quick?
Sure.
I'm just curious, in terms of in your experience, common early errors that can really come back to haunt you as you move down the road, and probably, I know it's a kind of a general question, but I would imagine that, in this 5-step process here, where do you think is the most common area for those errors that, you make early that come back to be compounded later?
Yeah, I'm going to say there's 2 places, and I didn't go into a ton of detail just because time is always seems to get long on these presentations, but the documentation these days is critical. And I see a lot of people rushing to get that first product out, and, oh, we'll catch up on risk analysis later. And, oh, yeah, I gotta get that, I gotta get that documentation done. And what ends up happening is the design control process can get away from you. And in the process of rushing to get first prototypes done and get that critical, first patient into a clinical study, what happens is that we find ourselves looking at documentation after the fact and trying to play catch up on design control. And it's a lot harder to retrace history than it is to document along the way. As painful, or as, I'm an engineer by training, and, we all learn that's, nobody likes to write anything down, and everyone hated writing their lab reports, but reporting that stuff is doing it as you go is much easier than trying to retrace history and remember what you did, because time flies and you're trying to document something a year later and you're trying to remember, oh yeah, we did change that, and why did we do that, and does Sally Joe remember? And that's probably the biggest gap, and it's always something that FDA is looking for. I haven't filed one IDE where there wasn't something that we had to explain that we course corrected along the way. And it comes into play a lot when we do, we'll start with GLP animal study, and we may need to tweak some aspect of the device, and we only want to do like a couple of catch-up animals. But if I didn't document it adequately, it gets a challenge by FDA. So
yeah, and is that, when we talk about the documentation, I know there are several software solutions out there now. Any that you've used that help you do that, or is it, is this just a habit thing?
I think it's more a habit thing. The documentation, the tools that are out there, they just help you get it all, compiled, but you still have to have the discipline and the SOPs in place to actually do design reviews and to really compile that information and do the phase reviews that really are. And a lot of people say, oh, that's all quality's job. Not really. It's to be done really well. I definitely feel like the programs that I've been involved with, where it's a multidisciplinary team, it's a much more enriched process, and it's simpler. It ends up being simpler, as strange as that may sound.
And then I would imagine though, if you're slack with your documentation, then you end up basically spending more money farther along the process.
That's right.
mean, to get
Or
someone,
you read, yeah, and what happens is that if it didn't get appropriately documented, I see sometimes people really having to repeat testing, which is really always a disappointment from my perspective, because sometimes it's testing that, geez, if we only had a better story about why we, why we had this issue and why it's okay to do, just a bridging study. Instead, it's, oh, forget it, let's just do it all over again. And there goes your time and money.
So a question coming here is basically says, how do you validate the need? And then, ladies and gentlemen, if you want to add more questions into the Q&A panel, please do so.
Yeah,
What do you
validating.
think?
Yeah, I think that the need piece is where I would validate with end users as well as payers. Something that's very novel. I've seen, something that's going to change the practice of medicine. Those are the ones that I see people do some very effective, kind of forums of not only the physicians, but also the hospital administrators that might have to adopt some change in construct within the hospital, the way that patients are, treated in an ICU, way that monitors are set up in the ICU. And, you would change the protocol for, like a septic patient in an ICU. You would really want to understand how to implement that change and how easily you could affect that modified practice pattern in the ICU. That requires more than just an intensivist, a surgeon or a physician that would say, yeah, that's going to be a really important parameter for me to measure. It's got to be, what's it going to take to initiate a protocol modification in an ICU? Then, it's like, oh, well, you'll have to go to Joint Commission for that, or you'll have to do something fancy. And then the third leg of that stool is the payers. What's it going to take to get this new construct of a practice pattern paid for? Because it can be the greatest thing since sliced bread, but if it's not going to get paid for, it's not going to get sold. I worked with a client that had a very, very interesting and novel way of addressing back pain. And let's just say, this company had a very revolutionary way to address the pain centers, not a TENS unit, but let's just say it had a concept where it was, modifying spinal signaling, and they could not get that company funded. They did a big clinical trial. They got their PMA approval, and then they couldn't do anything with it because it had no payment and there was no investors at the end of the day. And they had a product that was already approved. It was disappointing because they had raised a whole bunch of money, and then the company kind of went quiet. And so if you had known it ahead of time, it would have been a better product.
It'll be interesting also in sort of where access to that clinical setting is greatly reduced, how you do that. I think that's entirely new. Any things that you're seeing lately that are innovative or
telemedicine? Yeah, from a telemedicine perspective, the software tools and the constructs for patient assessments that utilize a computer versus some sort of interaction with, touching hands on a patient. Those are the things that are jettisoning forward. I think both from the ideation side as well as from the acceptability from FDA. And CMS is, they're very open to paying for tele construct. So I think this is a sweet spot for anybody with those kinds of products and applications. It remains to be seen how long that wave will last, but for right now, everything's getting pushed through that way.
Let's keep moving on. We have a few more questions here in the chat. Keep them coming if you want. We do have some time. First question, what resources or people do I reach out to in order to figure out my likely classification, drug versus device versus combo, for a really novel idea that doesn't really fit into any of the above categories?
Yeah.
Is this an appropriate question for a pre-sub, or is there a faster, cheaper, easier way to figure this out?
So this one, there is an actual process for filing what's called an RFD, a request for designation, for things that are very, very on the edge between, those are drug versus device. That request for designation really is centered around putting forth your premise, your concept, and sending that request into it's a special office that reviews those. It doesn't go to device or drug. It goes to this special group at FDA that does the review. Before you do that, it is important to do your homework. There's, whether you talk to a regulatory consultant or a regulatory attorney or something like that, do that first, because there's definitely research that needs to be done to build the RFD. I've done a few of those. Most of the time we put forth a position as opposed to submitting the request. We actually say, hey, Mr. Device Group, this is our product, and you go with a pre-sub and say, this is a device, and this is why, and you put your justification forth if you want it to be a device, or vice versa. If you want it to be a biologic or a drug, you put that forth, and then you can receive the feedback directly from that division. If you put the RFD in, be ready for what the answer is going to be, and that answer is binding. So you can go back and try and clarify, but I've had clients be disappointed with what the answer was that they got. So hopefully that makes sense. Yeah.
So it's really better to engage the services of the regulatory consultant or attorney, and then make the case that you are picking one classification or another, rather than asking the FDA, because they're going to hold you to it.
That's right. That's
okay. That's a penny pound scenario right there.
Yep.
Here's another one. How often do you have to notify the FDA with changes related to the device during the clinical study, IDE, via supplements and 5 days? For a small startup, it's a lot to keep up with the submissions. Are there any minor tech changes that you can skip reporting to the FDA, or do you have to report everything?
Wow, that's like a loaded gun question. Thank you a lot for that. Like, that's not like okay, it's almost 5 o'clock too. So so the devil's in the details. I don't mean to to just be pushing this off, but it's a complex question. And if I change something very, very minor, minor to you and minor to me might have two different definitions. So I'd be very careful here. I agree with you that small startups, it's a lot of work. I tell you what I do as kind of the little Lauren Baker secret. I try to load in as much as possible into a 5-day. And if they don't like the 5-day, they will transition you to a 30-day. So it's a little, if you can put a rationale together for a 5-day, they're a lot easier. that being said, there's different interpretations of 5-day versus 30 days based on which division you're working with. Certain groups, they take a lot more as a 5-day notice of change than others. And that's just the nature of the beast. And get to know your reviewers. That's part of the process that it's sort of the intangibles of what I've presented here today. I can't underestimate how important it is to visit with FDA early and often is my little vignette that I like to say. You want to be considering FDA as part of your team. They're an integral component to the process. And if you consider them part of the team, a lot of times I'll call and say, hey, reviewer ABC, we just have this little minor change, we're just changing the entire delivery system. It's just a minor 5-day notice, right? And that's the kind of dialogue that I would recommend you put forth. And I think that's the way to kind of think through it. Know who your audience is. That makes a big impact. Try the 5-day for everything. The no file business, pretty, maybe like some sort of manufacturing floor change on how you're doing something. Could be an annual report or in your IDE, but not a lot these days goes in the annual report. I'll tell you one thing I put in the annual report are typographical errors in the clinical protocol, where I uprevved a protocol and all I did was fix typographical errors. That's about it. Or some minor change on the manufacturing floor. And I mean super minor, like, I changed the work instructions, ECO 2075, that kind of stuff I put in the annual reports.
Great. We are running pretty short on time, so this is a broad question, so do your best. And great job with the other question there. I know that was a good question.
That was a hard one. Yeah.
That was a tough one. Any particular insights or challenges when developing a product that was historically used in a clinical setting and is now being modified for home use?
It's another, yeah. Okay. So there's a couple of factors that are really critical right now for, shift to home. There's usability testing is really got a big supercharge right now in the space here of medical device. So usability and human factors are kind of tied hand in hand, and they're extremely important on home use for anything that either it's been used, like dialysis machines is a classic example. They were always in center, and I was lucky enough to be part of a program where we took a product to the home use. That's required tons of human factors testing, and there's a whole formulaic approach to how you do human factors, and the patient and caregiver need to be an integral part of the human factors testing. The other piece is the usability testing. So your interface needs to be able to be used by not only, you have to do the end user testing. That's usually been done for something that's been in the hospital setting. It's usually been done by the physicians. You need to repeat that for the home use. The other major element to shifting to home is having the manual written for home use. So your labeling needs to be enhanced. Those are sort of the major components to moving something home.
Great. That was great. You did that really perfectly. It was a big, broad question. Well, we don't have any more questions queued up, so I want to say, Lauren, do you want to go to the closing slide so they can reach out if they do have
Sure.
more questions for
Yes.
yourself or your team?
Yeah.
And
So
go ahead and close
Barbara's,
those out.
yep, Barbara's email is listed there. Sunrise is a great resource for partnering for all of you small guys who are just got a great concept and need to get it to the next level. They're a great resource on the R&D and product development side. So I strongly recommend talking with Barbara, and be happy to talk to you at any point in the future.
Wonderful. Lauren, thank you so much for
Thank you.
your great insights and handling some really good questions. And thanks again to our audience for submitting those terrific questions, for being with us today on this MassMEDIC webinar. And again, I want, on behalf of our speakers and Sunrise Labs and MassMEDIC and all of yourselves, I want to wish you all a great rest of your day, and we will see you soon at our next program. Thank you and take care.
Thanks. Bye-bye.